Welcome to the Hedgineer Podcast with your hosts, Michael Watson and Jhanvi Virani.
Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of the Hedgineer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Michael Watson.
And I'm your other co-host, Jhanvi Virani.
And this is the show where we talk about technology, data, AI within asset managers, hedge funds, prop trading, and finance. So Jhanvi, what's new in the week in AI?
I feel like what isn't new is probably a more eventful question. There's so much. We're recording on Friday afternoon, just 2 hours ago. Claude announced Opus 5.0. It's beating even Fable on a lot of really important metrics on all of the benchmarks. I haven't had a chance to use it yet. Have you?
No. I mean, I still had
weekend plans
4.8 when we left the office. When I switched to Opus. So at least it wasn't available for me in Claude Code yet, but benchmarks have been really good.
Yeah, and it costs the same as the old Opus model, which is really interesting because it's beating Fable and things, and it's way cheaper, which is great.
Yeah, it's also it doesn't have the 30-day data retention that you had with Fable, and so you get the same ZDR guarantees. I hope this doesn't sound like an Anthropic advertisement, which it kind of sounds like it does. But yeah, like it seems like it's great.
Yeah. At the same time, they also announced some enhancements to the Microsoft 365 connector, which is huge. Like we use Microsoft Outlook for our email. All of our clients do. And for the longest time, you could only really use Claude to read emails or read files from SharePoint. But now for the first time, you can actually start modifying files or sending emails on behalf of yourself the same way that you could send Slack messages, which I think is really cool.
Yeah, I mean, you could do it before, but you'd have to build it yourself. This is nice for the M365 connector natively supports it, not just for Claude, but you can use it across any MCP connector. But yeah, I think that's a huge unlock for teams that aren't trying to build it themselves.
Mm-hmm.
The send email thing, though, I think that you have to be careful with.
Yeah.
I'm
like thinking through what I want to do with it. Like, I think that there's a lot. Like we, for example, don't have EAs, right? And so I would love to have some sort of automation where anytime someone comes, emails like either our like info channel for like inbound sales, even if the AI just comes back and says, hey, like here's a calendar link, like feel free to schedule time. I think that'd be really interesting, but I don't know if I'm at a place where I would feel comfortable doing something like that just yet. But I'm still thinking through like what I want to do with this.
Yeah, I've set up my local Claude Code environment to send emails on my behalf, and I don't like it.
You turned it off at some point, right?
I did. Yeah, I turned it off because I think that I wasn't reviewing them. I was always like really sensitive to like, even if it was internal, like what was being sent. And I had like rules that like only send emails that just aren't important. But even when I would read it, it would sound like that doesn't sound like me.
Yeah.
And you can lose your voice sometimes when you have AI representing you and sending emails or even sending Slack messages on your behalf. And we've now become very sensitized to sniffing out AI. And the second that you know it's AI, you devalue, deprioritize, and ignore it.
Yeah.
So like if I see you're probably like a victim of this. If I see anything with an M dash in a email or a Slack message that was for me, I immediately associate it with AI, and 90% chance I don't read whatever characters after the M dash because I don't feel as though the person put much effort into it, and oftentimes it's sloppy.
Yeah, I mean, I think the only reason why I'm even considering doing this is because I use AI to write all my emails today. And I feel like there are lots of instances where the output is as good as it gets. Sometimes I'll make minor tweaks, but I already have skills that reduce the use of M dashes or the genuinelys or the negation statements. And so I basically like have a setup that is almost automated. And so I'm just thinking about maybe automating that last step. Like for example, we use an AI note taker at Hedgineer. There is one on all of our sales calls. 90% of the time, all of my follow-ups are literally feeding in Fireflies and generating a response based on the explicit action items and the calls to action that we say at the very end of the call. Like at the very end of the call, I always say, next step is on us, we'll do X, Y, Z. And so I just have Claude generate that follow-up email with those next steps. And I just send it. So like the only thing that I'm doing is copying and pasting. And so I think that being able to automate that could be nice.
Yeah, I mean, I'm all for that. I like it when it comes from its own entity that is not me. So like I'll now have like a separate outbound email that
Yeah.
can be like I think it's like AI at hedgineer.io, but where it's explicitly this is coming from an AI. It's coming from AI like Steve the AI or Carl or Carla, where
maybe that would be like, maybe potential clients would like that. They'd be like, oh, these guys are using AI for everything. Like there's a designated AI admin that's handling all of our inbound.
yeah,
That could be kind of cool.
it kind of sells itself at the same time.
Yeah.
Because like when it starts coming as me, it's like, is this Michael or it's an AI? But if it's actually an AI representing itself, then it's clear by both parties. Like, oh yeah, of course there's an M dash. You're a stupid AI. But like, what did you say? Because at least now I'm putting you at the level of how I think AI should be treated versus having an AI impersonate me and then feeling swindled when I realize I'm not actually talking to Jhanvi. I'm talking to an AI.
Yeah.
And in some ways, I feel that you're misrepresenting yourself.
Yeah.
And
I do the same thing in Slack, right? Like you can send Slack messages on behalf of yourself through Claude, but I don't do that. I explicitly pass in a webhook URL and I have it always send on behalf of an application.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
And at least with the Slack, it auto posts like sent by Claude.
Yeah.
But still, it shows up. It's like when you have these, like we would do these recruiting email or these recruiting processes connected to Ashby, and you've read these really nice semi passive aggressive emails like, "Hey, happy Friday! You know, there's 3 different."
The thing that I did.
Yes, 3 different people that you haven't given your feedback for in Asheville. Wink, wink, nudge, nudge, link, link, link. So it's semi-convenient, but the passive, we never talked about this, but the passive aggressiveness of your AI agent to put reviews into Ashby for interview feedback, not a huge fan of.
Yeah, I know. It's titled it's a scheduled task on my cowork, and it's literally titled Bother Michael.
It bothers me.
It's meant to be aggressive because when you don't submit your feedback for a recruiting candidate, we just can't get back to their recruiter. So the recruiter is being aggressive to me, and then I'm following up with you. And at a certain point, we were just hiring so many people that I didn't have the time to do that.
Yeah.
So I set up a scheduled task that would use we use Ashby as our applicant tracking system. It's very similar to like Greenhouse or any of those very popular systems. They have APIs, obviously, and I just use them to build a script to pull all of the candidates that have outstanding feedback from you. And then it just sends like a very aggressive email to you in Slack, and it's meant to be
passive aggressive. No, I think
I have like I gave it 5 different types of tones and themes, and then I have it randomize which one it sends every time because I want to keep it somewhat interesting.
Yeah, no, it's like it would try to be witty, and I would not appreciate. The first couple were nice, but like eventually it was a certain point where you would get muted sometimes. And I thought that was actually it was nice. It was helpful. It was helpful. Yeah, but especially in our we talk about like semi-important things as the CEO and COO of a company.
Just semi, yeah.
And then we have like all of these like passive aggressive middle of our conversation threads, AI generated, make this review on Ashby that were not productive. But that's like the risk as you start experimenting with AI generated communication between people that can be, when you represent the other person, can like actually dilute the conversation instead of like enhance it.
Mm-hmm.
We've been doing a lot of stuff on how we use agents now for how we build everything. And I think Anthropic's been saying, oh yeah, we use agents for everything. They do all of our work and we're just kind of monitoring them for a while. And everyone else feels like, oh, we're just like, I don't know, kindergartners when it comes to this, but we're now starting to like live and breathe that internally on how we do everything from like, oh, there's a new feature request or there's a bug all the way through the PR process and seeing that come to life where humans feel as though they're in control, they're monitoring it, they're reviewing the code, they can go back and refactor and make changes, is pretty cool to see us like doing that operationally for everything that comes in the door. Do you want to kind of walk through how we've set it up?
Yeah. So I think one of the things that's been really exciting to see these past couple of weeks as we've onboarded new members of the team that they don't have engineers in they don't have engineer in their title, but they are embracing AI and automating their work with the same level of fidelity and seriousness and care that engineers do. And I think that's a function of, one, the really smart people that we've hired, but 2, also the fact that that's a very important like first first-class citizen of like how we build Hedgineer and grow it over time. And so we've historically had a lot of automations on the engineering side. Like we have a really good approach to spec-driven development where we have a lot of context around best practices for everything from data engineering to front-end engineering to API design. And whenever we have product specs or product requirement documents that outline new features or new projects, we essentially feed that directly into the AI, have that AI pull from engineering best practices, and then define what the kind of design architecture for the tech should be. And then we also use agents to automate the execution of it, the testing of it. We have like AI review processes built into our GitHub CI/CD processes. So every PR is getting reviewed by AI in addition to a human. And so I think that in a lot of ways, like our AI engineering is a very well-oiled machine, and 100% of our code, I would say maybe 99%, I never say 100, 99% of our code is written by AI, probably closer to 100%. Now we've got like a product team that is relatively new and using AI, and specifically the agent framework that we sell to our clients, we also use in-house. And so using those agents to set up agents that essentially are scanning through Slack, specifically the channels around like our platform, our feedback, client feedback, things like that, scanning those conversations and automatically triaging whatever feedback or bug that someone wrote in Slack, turning that into a linear ticket. And then I don't know the specifics on this, but essentially like there is also there are lots of skills and context underneath this, the same way that engineers have, where the agent can understand who on the engineering team is an expert on what, and can therefore automatically assign that task directly to the subject matter expert without a product manager ever even needing to do that practice. And so what it's turned into now is this really neat world where before, when I needed something or when I saw something broken, I would go to the subject matter expert, be like, hey, like, Alex, can you fix this thing for me? And he would either say, yes, let me fix it right now, or no, I need to prioritize this against all the other things that I'm working on. Help me prioritize it. And now we kind of have an agent doing that for us, which is really nice. And instead of me having to go to individual people, or you having to go to individual people, or a research analyst having to go to individual people, we just post in Slack. And literally we either start the message with all caps BUG, it's a bug, or feature request, or feedback from client, or idea for future build, or whatever, and then it, and then we write out whatever we want. And then the agent actually responds to that Slack, being like, yep, this is acknowledged. This is the linear ticket for it. And then we can actually track it over time pretty quickly. And I think that as amazing as this sounds, like this is only the first iteration of like what we are planning to end with, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's been really cool. I mean, it's been really nice having a product team. Like that's something that's somewhat new. And so that's great. But then also having a product team that's automating so many of the things that historically they've been bottlenecks for has been great. And then on the research side, I think that a lot of our research analysts are doing similar things, right? Like 80% of their job is building automations for clients, right? Like they work with research analysts on our clients' team to essentially understand how they're putting together their first take memos and then building skills that help them do that automatically. But then the other 20% of their work is actually looking inward and helping automate the way that we build these skills internally, which is like kind of a layer of abstraction above what our clients see, but is still important nonetheless. And so we have a new analyst that just joined this week and is already working on kind of taking some of the skills that we've built across clients and then creating almost like a base layer so that when we start with a new client and they want us to build a skill for the first time, we don't have to start from scratch the same way that we did 6 months ago, 3 months ago.
Mm-hmm. And we're using a lot of the core features that come out of the box with Anthropic for a lot of the agents. Like they have CMA, Cloud Managed Agents. We run jobs on schedules within CMA. It's the same thing if you're in Claude Code and you do /schedule and it runs remotely. Creating a wrapper around that API and using that for how we do looping, using that for how we do scheduling. We're looking at the same thing for how we do code execution running within Kubernetes. There's a lot of vendors out there like Coder that they're coming out with their agent frameworks for running your own compute internally. We've done a lot of testing with the agent SDK. There's tons of other options. Like there's so many of these different options. Like there's Google has ADK. There's Agent Core, also from AWS, and just figuring out which of these different underlying tools you want to use for your scheduler. Just pick one. If you don't have an engineering team that can do it for you, call us. We're Hedgineer. But pick one and then just start scheduling these things on a regular basis, because people can do this at home, right? Like we have so many of our clients that are using OpenClaw and running schedules on loops to be able to do work on their behalf. They're using Hermes, which has its own scheduling framework, and being able to connect their Gmail to like their lifestyle apps and be able to connect to your IoT devices or your like your iWatch and everything, and doing all this like fascinating stuff running on schedules, AI all the time. But then you go to like their job in the enterprise and like they don't have any of that, which is for me like kind of crazy how when we go and create agents and we want to automate triaging of tickets and issues and then assign it to an engineer and then have an agent come and pick up that ticket and make a change, and the engineer that it was assigned to just reviews the PR. Like, yep, that looks good. No, that doesn't look good. Let's go back. Let's still work with AI to make that change and have that be an agent-driven workflow. There's so many companies that still don't have that.
Yeah.
And it's kind of, there's a lot of different things that are misfunctioning on why. But regardless, there's, as much as we talk about how much AI is being used and all these like transformational things, people are questioning like, oh, what is the ROI of AI? I don't even see actually just people doing the basics of being able to even have the right tools for AI in order to do the simple things that they can otherwise be doing on their laptop at home, because there's not an AI policy and AI governance framework. People don't know how to use the right tools within a lot of these companies. And it's frustrating to me because I get to see how transformational it can be for us. But then you talk to like my peers or my friends that work in other organizations, they're like, they talk about some of these things like, oh, wow, but we don't get to like share that with our team. We don't get to like scale that. I don't know. How do you run AI agents when you close your laptop?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Like I close my laptop and I can't run an agent. What do you mean? How do you do that? Like, are you kidding me? Like there's nothing magical about that.
Yeah. I mean, I take what we've built for granted a lot because I'm just so accustomed to it. And I think that I have a pretty good understanding of where kind of the typical asset manager is because we work with them. But sometimes I forget how even technology companies or tech forward businesses where their business model is around tech are behind, or even very large companies that have these very robust engineering teams, how behind they are. And so one of the things that I usually like to do whenever we onboard a new member of our team is this person is likely, they're very smart, so they've likely interviewed at many other places while they were interviewing with us. And they also, statistically speaking, come from a very, some kind of prestigious or well-known business. And so I usually ask, I'm like, one, how does the way that we use AI compare to how you were using it at your old job? And two, like, how do you think that we fare to the other companies that you were potentially going to join, right? And so one of the themes that I've seen with a lot of the engineers that have joined in the past, like 3 weeks or so, is they're like, the way that we build with AI is like unparalleled. They're like, one of them said, like, I can't imagine going back to engineering the way that I was. And he worked at one of the most prominent hedge funds like in the country. And so that is sometimes something that I forget. Like, I don't actually fully appreciate it. And like the point that you were talking about with closing your laptops, like in our marketing materials, one of the kind of problem statements that we claim to solve is silos of one, which is something that I think resonates a lot with the sales calls that we're on, where they're like, yes, like the problem isn't that no one knows how to use AI. The problem is that a couple of people are doing really interesting things and we have no idea how to broaden that across a wider team in a way that's compliant. And also we have no idea how to grow that seed in a meaningful way. And like that, if anything, is more frustrating than just working at a company where no one gives a shit about AI. No one actually thinks about it. It's more frustrating when you can see that little boon of possibility and you can't actually do anything with it.
Yeah. And there's so much low-hanging fruit.
Yeah.
One, figuring out how you allow people to run AI on a schedule in your cloud or in an approved third-party cloud that has access to the same tools, access to the same context, and is something that you can monitor and observe. Like, that is not rocket science. That's something that most capable developers can do.
Yeah.
But most organizations don't even have that. And I think there's another blocker that even happens upstream of that, of even having that engineer come in, and that is figuring out a compliance, cyber, and infosec policy that can allow an organization to actually like work somewhat decentralized and autonomous when it comes to AI and figure these things out themselves with some basic core infrastructure. Because the infosec and the cyber and the compliance team don't actually coordinate on what a good AI policy is, so that there's no clear guidance on the rest of the organization of what they can and can't do and what they need to figure out in order to be able to do some of these better things like scheduling, running Claude Code, figuring out how you're going to do co-work. Why are you not using co-work? And having that be well understood, and then figuring out like, well, what are the things that you can solve, that you need to actually solve for in order to use co-work? Can you use Claude on mobile? Can you use ChatGPT Enterprise on mobile? Why can't you use it on mobile? If you do want to use it on mobile, what are the things that your organization has to do? Do you review AI usage? Do you have to review AI usage? How do you have a systematic process of reviewing AI usage in the organization and making sure that it adheres to these policies? And once you solve for these, you can answer these questions, you know why you're not doing something, you know why you are doing something. You then at least create the rules of the road for the rest of the organization to start innovating, give them the tools, give them a framework for budgeting, allow them to get feedback on what they're doing well and what they're not doing well, and unlock the kind of the AI czars, or like the centralization sometimes that happens within AI to the innovation pockets. And then have people that when you're focusing on building AI for an organization, you don't have to be responsible for the use cases. Let your users figure out their use cases. Help them share their use cases with each other. Help them schedule their use cases so it runs when their laptops close. Help them learn from their mistakes by being able to see how they're using AI and suggestions of how they can use it better. Teach them what a skill is. Teach them what memories are. Teach them what shared knowledge bases are. Teach them, like, give them the basic tools, and then they know their job far better than you ever will. And I think that's something that we realized when we touched on a couple episodes where we were rejecting the concept of a forward deployed engineer and embracing the concept of a forward deployed analyst, because that analyst that understands the domain, they know their job better than you ever will. They understand how to curate context on how to design a workflow and what data needs to be available and how that data needs to be interpreted better than any engineer that doesn't know anything about that data ever will. And so figuring out how you could decentralize the AI innovation, but give them the basic tools that allow them to build on their coworkers and share with their coworkers is what, if you're responsible for an AI implementation, you need to be focusing on. But before that, you need to make sure that the compliance, the infosec, and the cyber team are all on the same page to allow somebody that's responsible for AI to enable that decentralization so that you can have these pockets of innovation actually start building on top of each other and sharing across each other. So that's why one of the things we've had to start doing is offering AI policy creation as a service, and then wrangle cyber, infosec, and compliance together in order to make sure they're in the same room and they understand what does a good AI policy look like. How do you define the actual surface areas and enterprise tools that you can use with AI? Like, do you use ChatGPT Enterprise? Do you use Claude Enterprise? Do you allow co-work? Do you allow now co-work on mobile? Co-work now on desktop? Do you allow Claude Code? If you allow Claude Code, do you allow it on Mac and Windows? Do you allow it on remote SSH environments? If you allow it on remote SSH environments, what are the cyber policies around them? Do you have something like a CrowdStrike that looks at the run times of where you're running all of your agents at? Do you have something that looks at the network layer, like a Palo Alto network or a Zscaler? How do you actually have all the observability? I could go on forever, right?
Well, like what? So I think that the point that you made around like people not being able to close their laptops without stopping whatever workflow they're running, I think is one of the biggest blockers for people that are trying to use Claude or OpenAI or whatever in more innovative ways. Like, if you're a company that's trying to unlock that for your team, what do you think are like the main points of consideration? Because I know that I also think that this conversation is constantly evolving as like there are more security breaches. Like there was that Hugging Face security breach where there was an agent that was running within a sandboxed virtual machine and it was somehow able to access a production database that it shouldn't have been able to read. So like, what is the advice that you would give someone that's trying to figure this out for their company for the first time?
So one is know where the code is at, like where Claude is actually being run, and don't try to control Claude. Control the environment that it runs in the same way that you would control any sort of compute environment from a cyber and infosec perspective. Like if you only allow Claude to run in if you only allow, for example, your developers to work within a remote virtual machine that runs within your cloud and not actually have them work on their desktop, there's many different software providers that enable you to do this. Like most developers are used to working in a remote VM. There's companies like Coder that have isolated virtual machines that you can run Claude Code in and have your entire enterprise run it there. And that's very common. The benefit of that is that you're no longer talking about what can Claude Code do and not do. You're talking about the container that it executes in within the Kubernetes cluster. What does it have access to from the networking layer? What image does it run on? What are the ways that you have observability into the runtime within that container with something like a CrowdStrike? How do you have observability of the network layer and control of the network layer? You can use things like Zscaler to see like what's going in and out of the network, Palo Alto networks, just what's going in and out of the networks. All of what I'm getting at, even if you don't know what these things are, there's nothing that I said that has anything to do with AI. This is just basic infosec and cyber IT best practices. That if you control that and you understand the control plane that AI is being deployed in, what the AI does in that machine doesn't matter. I mean, it does, right? Like you want to be like, well, what data does it have access to? Does it have write access? Does it have read access? But again, that's nothing new, right? Like if you wanted to provision a user to have read access and write access to a database, you had to like be conscious. Well, what if they accidentally type drop star from table and they enter that, or just drop table command? That happens all the time. That's why you don't give people write access to tables. Now, this is easier said than done, but nothing here is fundamentally new from IT best practices. And so if you want to really lock down, give people remote computers running in a virtualized environment. Let it look as though they're running code locally on their machine by teaching them or like having somebody automatically set up their VS Code with a remote SSH environment. And you lock down that remote environment and then you say, all right, everyone can have Claude Code. We're rolling out to the enterprise. We have lockdowns on what you can do in the compute environment the same way as we always have when we roll out remote virtualized environments. We monitor everything with Zscaler at the network layer. We may or may not be monitoring processes for various different tools that can monitor in process and try to stop something before it's malicious. We control what the image that it runs on, so what tools you do and don't have access to. We limit the ports that you might be able to forward or that you can't forward. Like we control all those things the same way that we've always controlled compute environments. And yes, you can run Claude Code in that the same way you could run any piece of code in that environment, but we control what you can and can't do by managing that environment runtime opposed to trying to manage Claude Code. Now, there are some tools that don't necessarily work like that. So like Cowork, for example, doesn't run in a virtualized machine. It runs in a local machine that is isolated and it has a specific VM. And for something like that, you rely a little bit more on how you control Cowork versus control the compute, because the compute you're ultimately locked down by the physical device that it runs on. Because like that's one of the things with Cowork. It runs on the physical device. They are rolling out web. They are rolling out mobile as well. But again, that's physical device. There's not remote code execution yet. They're going to come out with eventually remote code execution for Cowork. So you can get this like the blend between co-working and code. But at least knowing how Cowork is deployed is important to be able to like roll it out across the organization. But Claude Code, for the most part, it's a relatively solved problem if you know how to manage infrastructure.
Yeah. I feel like first of all, I would not want to be working in cyber right now. Like, I feel like this is an incredibly high stakes, stressful kind of thing to be navigating for the first time. Like, I don't think that there is any guideline or hard rule or like standard that's been set. I think all of that's being set in real time. But like to your point, yes, when you provision a human, you think about it in the same way. But I think the difference between that and this is that the accountability is different. Like what happens when an agent does drop star from table? Does that accountability fall on the cyber team, the compliance team, and the InfoSec team that put together that policy or put together that architecture that allowed that to happen?
Yeah, I think so. Because like their job is to.
That's terrifying, isn't it?
But that's always been the case, right? Like when somebody runs a drop table command.
Not really. Your compliance team's job is always setting the policy, but if you don't follow that policy, you get fired, right? They don't get fired.
Correct. But the policy needs to align with what people don't necessarily have. Like what you do right now is you can't use it, so we're turning it off. And so what can go wrong? Well, nothing, because you're not allowing to use the tool. So that's how you control it. When you say like, well, you cannot make any outside network connectivity within the runtime of the Claude Code environment, what does that mean? Well, you can't send data out. So like, what are you stopping when you do that? Like, oh, you're stopping exfiltration of data. Like, oh, I'm concerned that like they're going to actually exfiltrate data. Well, you just don't allow that runtime to do that by the network layer, not the Claude layer, the network layer. If you want to say, oh, I don't want to allow somebody to be able to delete something from a table, well, you don't allow Claude then to have write access to the underlying table managed in a similar way as a DBA. And so with humans, you get security via obfuscation, which is a common term used in the industry, which means it's not actually secure, but it's so hard to figure out how I would do something wrong that I functionally won't do the thing that you don't want me to do because I don't even know how. AI is going to figure that out. And so security via obfuscation is no longer a valid approach for IT and cyber teams. And for a lot of organizations, they have a lot of obscurity via obfuscation, and they also haven't needed to have best, quote, whatever the best practices are, because that wasn't always like a significant vulnerability because you didn't have all these people internally having these possible attack vectors being surfaced because they didn't have enough time in the day, and they didn't really have the possibility for an agent or an AI to misinterpret something and do something that could be quote unquote malicious without having the context that it was doing it or of what to do. And so like the internal attack vectors are higher, but you solve them in a very similar way that you would solve it in a pre-AI era. You understand like what are the policies, what do we want people to do, what do we not want them to do? How are the ways that we don't make that something that's subjective to the person, and you make it explicit based off of what the environment is that they're working in, what they can and can't do. They don't have a choice. But you allow that to be liberal enough to allow them to accomplish the things they want to do, like use Claude Code, schedule something, run it in a cloud, learn from their mistakes, share data with their team, access data internally, update their notes, write to systems in a secure way. All those things can be solved, but there needs to be coordination up front between the cyber InfoSec and compliance teams for sure.
Yeah.
One of the things that was kind of funny about the Hugging Face and OpenAI issue that you mentioned was when Hugging Face identified that they were hacked, they took the logs and they wanted to analyze them to identify what was the cyber vulnerability that was exploited in order to allow them to close that vulnerability. And then when they use frontier model providers, they all block them, saying that, oh, no, you're doing something malicious. And so the censorship of the frontier providers actually prevented them from actually securing their systems.
And you're talking about the vulnerability itself was caused by ChatGPT.
Well, it was exploited by ChatGPT.
It was found and exploited by ChatGPT.
Yes.
And then they tried to fix it and ChatGPT refused to answer the question.
Yes. It's
crazy.
kind of like you're interviewing the suspect, and the suspect is pleading the fifth under their rights and responsibilities. But in this case, it wasn't crime, and it wasn't just ChatGPT. I think they were trying both like Claude and ChatGPT, and they were both refusing to provide the necessary information.
What'd they do instead?
They went to GLM, ran an open source model that they were self-hosting, and then that very clearly explained the problem. And so I think that building on the episode that we had last week, that's like a really strong narrative of the need for open source models, the need for competition, freedom of thought when it comes to allowing people to interact with and use AI effectively and not being dependent on a closed source, censored. And I'm not saying open source models don't have censorship within their weights as well, because they do. You can't ask most of these open model providers about Tiananmen Square, but the forced censorship that you get out of the frontier model providers are counterproductive when sometimes you need them the most. And even so, like it was Jensen had his first tweet today in support of open model providers. Satya had a large post today in support, an emphasis on the need for open source model providers for both like the American economy, entrepreneurship, technology, U.S. security, global well-being, as a counterfactual to the narrative that we've been getting from a lot of the frontier model providers that we need regulation. We need to shut down these open source model providers, that there are geopolitical risks coming from China. And it's interesting to now see like these heavyweights going to battle on like the open source, team coming from like Meta. You see it coming from Grok now with Elon. You see it coming from Jensen, that he just wants compute. I mean, it's difficult to say like what the incentives
They all have
are.
different motives.
Yes, they all have different motives. Zuck, and I think the open source world, because like now they're also like, hey, we don't need to build models. We'll just provide the infrastructure.
Yeah.
And then you have the Anthropics and the open AIs on the other side on open source versus closed source. And it's not that like they're preferential or one. It's like, are closed source models going to be made illegal is the debate that is presented right now. And there's a ton of lobbyist money going into this. Like they're both sides, but there's a lot of money now on the open source side. Like NVIDIA, Google, they print money, Facebook, SpaceX. I would not be wanting to go against a lobbyist check when they're on the other side.
Yeah. And I mean, it's an interesting philosophical question too. I don't even know if it's an economic or a business one. It's like I don't know, like how many researchers do you need? Like these models are consistently getting better. You've got a couple of these players that are kind of moving the ball forward. Why not have an open source community that's like following right behind it?
Of course.
Of course. But I don't know. We'll see what happens.
All right, Jhanvi, I think that's a wrap.
Until next time.
So thanks everyone for tuning it in. This is the Hedgineer Podcast. I'm your co-host, Michael Watson.
And I'm your other co-host, Jhanvi Virani.
Follow us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, TikTok, yada, yada, yada. You name it, we're there. And we will see you later.
The Hedgineer Podcast releases episodes weekly on Tuesday. Our hosts are Michael Watson and Jhanvi Virani. The Hedgineer Podcast is produced and edited by Aaron Free. Follow us on your social platform of choice and reach out to us at podcast@hedgineer.io.